By the time you're watching this video, it's likely that this is the best-selling Mercedes EV in America. This is the new 2024 EQE SUV. It's closely related to the EQS and EQS SUV. Lots of EQs and E's and S's going on in these names, but this is the smaller and more affordable EV, at least for the moment, until we see a new EQC, which we all know is coming soon. Now, when I say less expensive, I mean considerably less expensive. The EQS SUV starts at $104,400. This is nearly $30,000 less expensive, starting at $77,900. And interesting twist, you get the choice of either a single motor rear-wheel drive model or a dual motor all-wheel drive model for that same base price. Now, how is it so much less expensive than the EQS when they share such a lot when it comes to the structure? Well, obviously, smaller battery pack means less range. We also get less power out of the motors, under 300 horsepower for the single motor model, and there's no three-row version of the EQE because the entire vehicle is smaller. Think of this as the electrified GLE. Actually, don't think of it as the electrified GLE because that would imply that it's related to the GLE in some fashion, and it absolutely is not. This is a completely unique vehicle, and as you can see up front, it definitely looks very different. Think of this instead as GLE reimagined for the electrified 21st century. So logically, lots of attention to aerodynamic detail going on up front, and that has certainly resulted in a bit of a jelly bean-like profile for the new Mercedes EQ line of vehicles. Full LED digital light headlights up here, of course, with the Mercedes distinctive grille, I guess you'd say, up front with these little Mercedes logos right there and that huge Mercedes logo in the middle. But you'll notice that unlike the gasoline lineup, everything up front is certainly smoother and more aerodynamic. One could say more jelly bean-like. The side profile is also unquestionably aerodynamic, but at least it avoids the sort of suppository-like shape that we find in the EQS sedan. It's all very logical because Mercedes is trying to give us one of the most efficient entries in this luxury EV segment, and they've certainly managed to achieve that with the entire EQ lineup. You'll get nearly 300 miles of EPA range in this EQE SUV, and not to give away too much in advance, but we actually beat the EPA estimate in this by a reasonable margin, thanks to its very aerodynamic profile. Now, it is significantly shorter than the EQS SUV. I also think that that shortening has made it a bit more attractive in this general area back here. No third row is available in the EQE SUV. That's the EQS SUV. Again, lots of E's and Q's and S's going on here with this name. Since this is theoretically the electric GLE, you'll notice it is a little bit smaller than that. It's about 4 inches shorter with about a 3-inch shorter roof height. That puts this firmly in the mid-sized luxury EV SUV category, which is finally becoming a category in the United States. This is going to be a very direct competitor to the upcoming Polestar 3, the Cadillac Lyriq, of course, and the Audi Q8 e-tron. This is a decent amount larger on the outside than a Tesla Model Y or a Genesis GV70. Those are theoretically one category down from this, where ostensibly an upcoming EQC would play. The wheels on this model have been a bit controversial this week, as have been some other aspects of the EQE's design. You can remove these wheel covers, and of course, you can get different wheels if you want. As with most Mercedes models, there are a bunch of different wheels available on the EQE, all the way on up, of course, to the upcoming EQE AMG model, which is going to have some much more aggressive wheels and tires on it. Over here, we find this interesting little door, and that pops out so you can fill the windshield wiper fluid in your EQE SUV. Like the rest of the EQ lineup, the hood does open, but it's not intended for normal folks to open it. There is a release under there. You can actually pop it open, but there are no hood struts or anything like that. And logically, there's not a lot for users to do under there. They also put the only badging on the side right here in the lee of this area, and that's because aerodynamically it's kind of in a dead zone right there, so it doesn't really matter what they put in that spot. But the rest of this is very slab-sided. Of course, one big advantage to the slippery surfacing in the EQE is that it's pretty easy to clean, something I definitely noticed out here in the dusty mountain life that I lead. We have full LED taillight modules. The turn signals are amber, but the entire module looks red when those turn signals are off, giving it a really clean appearance. Obviously, badging right there, this is the EQE 500, and it is the dual motor model, so we get a 4MATIC badge over there. The rest of the bumper, very short and easy to clean, not much of an overhang. The downside to that, obviously, is that if you're in a minor fender bender rear end style, you probably are going to end up needing a new hatch. Since I suspect many of you are as ruled by your curiosity as I am, let's talk about the motors and the batteries while diving under the hood at the same time, even though under here, again, there's not a lot to see. Over here we just have the air handler with two absolutely enormous air filters in it, headlights, crash safety stuff going on here, the air pump for the adaptive air suspension system, all that's contained under the hood. And you will notice this has a shorter hood profile than many of the options with big front trunks up there. Now, this is the dual motor model, so under here there is an electric motor hanging out, but Mercedes does not publish quite as detailed motor specs as I might like. There are 3 different drivetrains at the moment, with a 4th coming soon. That would be the upcoming AMG version. At the moment, the base version is going to be the 350 Plus. That will give you 288 horsepower, 417 pound-feet of torque, a 90.6 kilowatt-hour battery pack, and an EPA range of 279 miles. That's probably the best value going in the EQE SUV lineup, and actually in the EQ lineup, period. If you want all-wheel drive, you don't get more power, 280 horsepower max, but you do get more torque because they install an electric motor up front, giving you 564 pound-feet total. Now, that dual motor model and the single motor model have the same base price. The reason for that is the battery pack changes. You actually get a slightly smaller battery pack in exchange for the extra electric motor. It goes down to 89 kilowatt hours. And that's probably the big reason that range tumbles down to 253 miles. This model is the 500 4MATIC. This bumps power up to 402 horsepower, torque all the way up to 633 pound-feet, and then it gains back the bigger battery pack, giving this more range than the less powerful 350 4MATIC. Hopefully you're all still with me. That means this one has a 90.6 kilowatt-hour battery pack and an EPA range of just about 10 miles less than the base rear-wheel drive model. And that's probably the most interesting thing about the EQE, is that efficiency has definitely been a focus here. Charging happens on the passenger side behind this door, and this is where opinions are probably going to start to diverge. The onboard level 2 charger is rated at 9.6 kilowatts. That is slower than the 11 kilowatt chargers we find on a lot of new EVs, and there are going to be a number of new EVs coming up with an optional nearly 20 kilowatt charger on board as well. On the other hand, if you don't have access to a high current EVSE, or you simply don't want to pay for one, it's probably not going to matter. And here in the forest, I typically charge my EVs at between 3 and 6 kilowatts, so the onboard charger wouldn't actually make a difference to me. This is good enough to get your battery from 0 to completely full in about 11 hours. If you want a DC fast charge, then there's a bit of a difference of opinion here as well. 170 kilowatts is the peak rating on this vehicle. That is a lot less flashy than the 250 or 270 kilowatts you find in some of the competition. But as we see in the EQS, this maintains that high peak for quite a long time, giving this a 32-minute charge from 10% to 80%, right in line actually with the direct competition from Tesla, and almost exactly the same as the Audi Q8 e-tron. If you want to charge faster than about 30 minutes for that 70% charge, your only real option at the moment is something like the Genesis GV70. It won't get you quite as far on a charge as this, but it will charge from 10% to 80% really, really quick. As you'd expect out of a modern Mercedes, the front seats are very comfortable, and the passenger seat is identical to the driver's seat. Of course, it doesn't have the powered tilt telescopic steering column, but it does still get the power extending thigh cushion, 4-way adjustable headrests, 4-way lumbar support, and the 3-position memory over there on the door. If you want to take seat comfort to the next level, then you want the massaging front seats that are available. But regardless of which option you choose, I actually find the front seats in the GLE to be a little bit more comfortable, and logically the GLS as well. That's part of what you're paying for. The first thing you're probably going to notice back here is the big panoramic moonroof. It certainly makes it feel light and airy in the rear seat, and unusually, it opens. If you're tired of EVs with just a big, huge sheet of glass that doesn't have a cover and doesn't open, then this is the solution to those worries, because this does both of those things. The next thing you're going to notice is that we have lots and lots of room in here, over 81 inches of combined legroom, and a reasonably wide rear bench, because even though this is a little bit smaller and a little bit narrower than the EQS, the width of the cabin didn't really change much versus the EQS, so we get a rear bench seat that's just about as wide. Definitely suitable for 3 adults for a short trip at least out there, and it is wider across the rear than a Tesla Model Y. You'll certainly notice that as well. We get air vents back here for the rear seat passengers, USB-C charge ports right there as well. This front seat's all the way back in its tracks. I put a 6'6" passenger in there. He was very happy. Still have about 3 inches of legroom left there. We also have a fold-down center armrest for the rear seat passengers with 2 cup holders built right in. The rear seats don't offer any recline. Well, I'll talk about that in a moment, actually, because there's a bit of a twist. But these are nominally a 40-20-40 folding rear seat design, so I could fold this center 20 section without folding the outboard side, but if I fold the outboard side, the entire module goes through as one piece. That makes this more cargo practical than a nominal 60-40 design because you could put skis, snowboards, IKEA furniture in here, and it definitely is more convenient than some of those simple 60-40 designs. Now, what do I mean about no recline? You'll notice this 60% side definitely feels more reclined than the 40% side. It's about 1.5 inches further forward, but it is now in a decidedly upright and certainly less comfortable position. The 2 different recline levels are achieved by the use of these 2 different latches over here on the side. And you actually have to do this manually. So you have to fold that one down, and then you can use that latch, or you pull this one up and into place, and then the seat will latch with that one right there. This is done to square off the cargo area in the back, so I wouldn't really call it rear seat recline. It's mainly for the squaring of the cargo area, or if you had a child seat and for its installation in the back, you needed the seat to be a little bit more upright. Speaking of child seats, we do have 2 sets of latch anchors just for the outboard seat positions, but top tether anchors for all 3 seats. Most of the size difference between the GLE and the EQE can be accounted for by the GLE's longer hood, but we do have some slightly different dimensions in the back as well. We get a narrower greenhouse, we get wider pillars right here, and a smaller cargo opening. Everything combines to give us about half the cargo room you'll find in the GLE. I suspect there is a bit of a variance as far as how the cargo areas were measured. I couldn't get details from Mercedes about which measurement standard they're using for the GLE versus the EQE. I suspect they might be a little bit closer in reality. 14.5 cubic feet is probably counting just the space between this roller cargo cover and the cargo area load floor. There's also some additional storage space under the load floor. It is a surprising amount of space under here, actually. If I remove the load floor from the vehicle, you can see more of it. This is where we find the Can-A-Fix-A-Flat and the tire inflator kit. You can tie them down to the vehicle, of course. And we have a cargo well here that is almost deep enough to put a 22-inch roller bag. I think actually with a little bit more precision, Mercedes probably could have crafted an even larger cargo area under here, or perhaps one that was just a little bit more pragmatic. As we look around the interior, keep in mind this is the EQE 500, so obviously the base 350 is going to be a little bit different, but we do find a lot of standard equipment there, like standard ambient lighting and the standard moonroof as well. Now I said it opens, but I don't mean it slides, because it just goes to that vent position right there. So you can get a little bit of air, but you're never going to be free air opening right there above the driver and front passengers' heads. Moving down from there, we have 4-way adjustable headrests. They adjust for height electrically and then manually forward and backward. We also have height adjustable shoulder belts for the driver and front passenger. As you can see, there is a lot of ambient lighting going on here, just as we see in a number of other modern Mercedes models, including this ambient light strip right there on the front seat backs. The seats themselves are not terribly aggressively bolstered, and I certainly felt like I was sitting on the seat rather than in the seat, which is a little bit different than the EQS that I last experienced. Also, the bolstering is not terribly aggressive on the seat bottom cushion, so it is a little bit easy to find yourself sliding around. Logically, since the price tag is not as high as the EQS, the materials quality up front is not quite as high either. So we find hard plastics down there around the bottom of the doors, but we do have a standard Burmester audio system, and again, lots and lots of ambient light pipes going on. Ambient light pipes on that extension for the door armrest, down there inside the bottle holder, around the seat controls, around the top of the door, and as you can see, the animated light effects that we see in other Mercedes vehicles are definitely happening here as well. We then move over to the dashboard, where we find one of several different interior treatments available. This wood trim has itty-bitty little laser-cut Mercedes logos that are also backlit on there. It's really obvious at night, but it's a little bit difficult to see during the day, although during the day you can still see all the other ambient lighting going on under that section, above the section, and even inside that turbine-style air vent there. If you want the hyperscreen, you can get that in the EQE, AMG, but that's going to come a little bit later. At the moment, we're just going to get this single screen right here on the dash. That's one of the bigger differences between this and the EQS, which can get the hyperscreen there. One thing I should mention before we go on is that this particular EQE has some build quality issues. You can see that the stitching does not align on the doors and the dashboard over here, but it does on the passenger side. Also over here on this side, we definitely have an alignment issue going on with this light pipe and the dashboard there. It's like something isn't quite snapped together right. I was able to inspect some EQE SUVs from a local dealer. They did not seem to have these particular problems, so be sure and inspect your EQE before you get one. And of course, let me know if you have any problem with yours if you have one. Over here, we have the latest MBUX software on, again, not a hyperscreen, but definitely a solidly large touchscreen here. It supports wireless CarPlay integration, which is a nice touch, but there's something funky with the charging mat down there a little bit lower. Now, if I go to the native interface, you can see that it's just the same as the rest of the lineup, with charging information on the screen wirelessly directed to the car as well. So you can, for instance, you can see the status of those DC fast chargers, things like that on the screen. We have touch buttons down here for all the climate control functions and a number of other vehicle settings as well, and then a bank of touch and physical buttons for other features. So over here we can go through our various different drive modes, and you can see this entire button module moves a little bit. It then knows what option you've selected by where you've touched. We have a button for the 360-degree camera system right there, a button for direct access to the vehicle's electric functions. This takes you over to system settings and system functions. We have a fingerprint reader, power, volume knob, slider, I guess you'd call it, right over there for the system. Now on this one, you can touch up and down for the volume, but over here on the steering wheel, you just have to use the slider, and I do find that a little bit annoying. Now, going further down the rabbit hole, we have lots of black plastic. It is starting to show a little bit of scratches there, so certainly something to keep in mind. In here, we have the Qi wireless charging mat, which I find relatively conveniently located to USB-C charge ports. The problem, though, when I say relatively, is the cup holder thing. So if I pull the cup holder out and I snap this into place, then obviously it takes up a decent amount of storage. You then lock it into place, and you can put some decently large takeout drinks in there. But now, how do you get your smartphone in and out of that smartphone charging slot? I do find that just a little bit odd. We then have a slider cover that covers that area. Again, lots of black plastic, and an absolutely enormous storage area under that console. So definitely good use of space there. The center console is a bifold style center console. You could put a gallon of milk inside. I was just barely able to do that and still close the lid. That's the button to open that back up right there. On the driver's side, this model has a 12.3-inch full LCD instrument cluster, but we do not have the heads-up display, which is optional. There is a lot of optional content on the EQE and the EQS. Very similar steering wheel to other Mercedes models. Paddles on the back for adjusting the regenerative braking. Over here we have the controls for the adaptive cruise control, which is optional. These touch buttons control that multifunction LCD. They're all touch buttons on the steering wheel here. This touch button controls the center display, so you can actually navigate through that center display with these controls here, and then we have those infotainment controls. But you'll notice none of these controls are track forward backward. If you want to do that, you have to use the toggles over here on the screen or some of the other menus. You can also use the on-screen interface for media up here. If I scroll over to that, there are a number of ways to do this, and then you can use the toggle here to go forward and backward, but none of that is as convenient as I would like. I said I would talk about the seat controls, so here they are. They are touch buttons as well. Again, lots of shiny black plastic going on here. You touch the top of the headrest to move it down, you pull it up to move it up, seat back, forward, backward, etc. Basically, the knurled edges are where you touch to adjust the seat. We then have the controls for seat heating, ventilation, and the 3-position memory. With the exception, of course, of the AMG trims, I think that the entire EQ lineup is really doubling down on classic Mercedes virtues of an isolated cabin and excellent ride quality. That's certainly something you'll notice in here. It has a level of isolation and compliance and softness to it that we really haven't seen in many Mercedes products for a while. Now, there's a downside to that. It's engagement. 0 to 60 in this model is actually really quick. This one, 4.5 seconds, 0 to 60, lots of instant thrust. But often it doesn't feel quite as fast as those numbers would indicate. That's actually slightly faster than the Mercedes quoted 0 to 60 time. And the reason for that, at least in this model, is the adaptive air suspension system. It is very, very soft and cushy. Almost marshmallowy soft, I might say. Also, it's relatively heavy. This is heavier than a 6.2-liter supercharged Dodge Durango. This is a fairly heavy SUV. And as a result, it definitely takes longer to stop from 60 miles an hour to 0. In our testing, 135 feet from 60 miles an hour to 0. So definitely longer than the last Mercedes GLE we tested, which was the GLE 53. And speaking of that GLE 53, that was slower 0 to 60 than this. This is actually a little bit quicker in passing maneuvers as well, and it certainly feels more urgent when you romp on the throttle versus the GLE, since there are no gears to shift through. But it's not as engaging to drive as the GLE 53. Around corners like this, it's best not to push the EQE too hard. These tires definitely give up the ghost a little bit early. Those stopping distances are significantly longer than the GLE. As far as the score goes, I'm going to have to give this a B- in handling, because the softness of the suspension means it's just not the kind of car that begs to be driven harder. And if you do start pushing its limits, the tires start giving up and the body starts wobbling around a bit, even if you put this in sport mode, where it's going to firm up the damping a bit. The counterpoint, of course, to the marshmallow-like handling in the EQE SUV, at least in this version, is a really great ride, even out on rougher road surfaces like the gravel road that we're on here. Now, this model again has the adaptive air suspension, so it's going to feel a little different if you get the regular steel spring suspension. It's going to feel a little bit more engaging. I was able to spend a tiny bit of time in the model with the regular base suspension, and I did prefer that just a little bit as far as engagement goes, but this is certainly going to give you the best long-distance ride. This has one of the best ride qualities, honestly, in any modern EV. I haven't driven the new Rolls-Royce EV, but I suspect if you want something a little bit cushier and more comfortable than this, outside of the EQS, that's probably where you'd have to go. The ride quality in here is significantly more comfortable than a Tesla Model Y. Model Ys tend to have sort of a firm and bouncy kind of ride quality to them, and it hasn't really changed too much with the new Comfort suspension in that model. It's not as comfortable as the Model S or Model X. This is definitely less expensive than a Model X, but I actually think that this rides a little bit better. The Model X does have one of the better rides in the Tesla lineup, with the best going to the Model S. I would say this is actually fairly comparable to something like that Model S. So undoubtedly, when it comes to the ride score, I'm going to give this model an A+. Back out on the paved road, I measured 69 decibels at 50 miles an hour, easily making this one of the quieter EVs we've driven. So if you're looking for an EV with classic Mercedes virtues like excellent ride quality, quiet isolated cabin for long road trips, etc., this is definitely going to be that EV. If, however, you're looking for engaging steering and engaging body dynamics, this isn't going to be that EQE. Wait for the AMG yet again. On the other hand, efficiency is definitely this vehicle's forte. We've been ranging between 3.6 and 2.7 miles per kilowatt hour, depending on the drive cycle. And remember, I go up and over a 2,200-foot mountain pass, and my weekly average is more impressive than that. 3.2 miles per kilowatt hour in this model. That gives us a theoretical range decently above the EPA estimates for the EQE SUV. I was able to get on one charge 290 miles out of this vehicle, again, involving some portion of my daily commute going up and over that mountain pass. This is definitely very, very efficient as long as you keep your speeds below about 75 miles an hour, but even at those higher highway speeds, I think the reason that this is exceeding some of those estimates is because of that over highway speed efficiency number. So if you're routinely going 70, 75 miles an hour, this does appear to be a lot more efficient than some of the other boxy EVs you'll find out there. And that's why when it comes to the range and fuel economy, I'm certainly going to give this an A+. Can you go further in some EVs? Yes, there are Tesla Model Ys that are rated further than this. In real-world driving, the difference actually could be a little bit closer than you might think. But remember, the Model Y is actually a smaller vehicle than the EQE. We don't have any official range estimates yet for the upcoming Polestar 3, but they have been indicating that that will go further than this. It will have a bigger battery pack, so it's probably going to be a little bit less efficient though. When it comes to EQE pricing, you can look at it in two ways. Compared to a Model Y, it's pretty expensive. Compared to a Model X, it actually starts less expensive by quite a bit. $79,050 is where it starts with destination. That gets you the rear-wheel drive EQE 350, 288 horsepower, 279 miles of range. That's about $3,000 more than the base EQE, which will go 305 miles, so you do have some choices to make there. All-wheel drive is oddly enough a no-cost option, but as I said before, remember you get a smaller battery pack. So while it may not cost you dollars, it will cost you range in order to get the all-wheel drive option. Also, even though torque bumps up to 564 pound-feet, it does not really improve the 0 to 60 time. According to Mercedes, it's 1/10 of a second better because of some of those other changes that were made on board. If you actually want to go faster, you're going to need the EQE 500. That starts at $90,650, and it will get you 0 to 60 in 4.6 seconds. If you want to go even faster, there's the AMG version for $110,450, or $113,750 if you get the Pinnacle version. That will do 0 to 60 in 3.4 seconds. But you'll notice that no version of the EQE is going to be quite as swift as the Tesla Model X. Also, a little bit different than the Model X, no version of the EQE SUV will have 3 rows, whereas they're optional in the X. And in some ways that makes the Model X more of a model, or more of an EQS competitor. Sorry, too many letters going on in my brain here. But really, these two vehicles kind of split the difference with that Model X, because size-wise, it's kind of in between the EQS and the EQE. There's a whole lot of letters going on here yet again. So with that in mind, let's talk about the more direct competition. According to the limited amount of cross-shop data I was able to get my hands on, which admittedly is not a great deal, it appears that most shoppers of the European luxury EVs are not necessarily cross-shopping a Tesla Model Y. They tend to be shopping more amongst the European luxury brands, although clearly those Tesla alternatives are still there, which is why they're on this pricing chart. But the first competitor we should talk about is the one that I have also recently driven, the Audi Q8 e-tron. This is a decent amount less expensive, starting and all the way up the line. It also is a really intriguing option because it is the only one of this bunch that is riding on a platform that's not dedicated EV. It actually is a converted version of the platform that Audi uses in a wide variety of other vehicles, although obviously heavily modified for the big battery we find in the e-tron. And that battery is really big, 114 kilowatt hours. If you're familiar with the original e-tron, this battery is nearly 25% larger than that. And that's why we get over 300 miles of range if you choose the Ultra option and you choose the Sportback body style. There are going to be 2 different body styles available here. There's the more traditional SUV-shaped one, and then the Sportback look. That's kind of an interesting twist also, because there's only one body style in the EQE, and I would argue it's really more of a Sportback style body. In the e-tron, not only is it less expensive, it comes with the bigger battery standard, it comes with 402 horsepower standard, all-wheel drive standard, and a pretty decent charge system as well. Audi still gives you the option of having a double charge port, which is something that I find really cool. That is going to depend on the trim level, of course, and all of the versions of the e-tron have pretty high ranges. So the lowest version is going to give you 285 miles of range. The longest range version, which is going to be the Sportback with Ultra, is going to give you 300 miles of range. Handling is not quite as good as the EQE SUV, and I do find that the Q8 e-tron, or Q8 e-tron, whatever we're calling it now, it does sometimes feel a little heavy out on the road, especially on winding mountain roads where you're starting to push it just a little bit too much. The front tires do tend to lose grip before the EQE or the BMW iX. On the other hand, the e-tron has a really big and really square cargo area. It has a big, generous back seat, and it feels just like a regular Audi that happens to be electric. Also, if you want a spare tire, this is one of the very few EVs of any description that has a spare tire. It's the only one in this segment that does have a spare, as long as you would call the Rivian R1S in a different segment. Next up, we have the divisively styled BMW iX. This is quite expensive, starting at $88,000 essentially. And that's mainly because it's built on a brand new platform that combines carbon fiber reinforced plastic and aluminum intensive construction together into a very modern looking platform. That's what gives it the ultra high efficiency scores, while also being a bit boxier than some of the other alternatives. It certainly looks more like a regular BMW X5 in terms of its general profile than the Q8 e-tron looks like the rest of the Q lineup, or the EQE looks like a GLE, for instance. But because of the lighter weight construction, it's not that lightweight, but when you consider how heavy it would be if it was steel, definitely pretty lightweight there, we get very good range. It also has a big battery pack, of course. But the range is most impressive in the high-performance version. If you get the M60 version of the BMW iX, you'll get 296 miles. And most of the competition has a drastically lower range for their high-performance version. Also, the regular 50 version has pretty wide tires and gets 307 miles of range. Now those range figures are going to vary based on the wheel and tire package you get, but any way you slice it, the iX has really great range. It also has a very modern and futuristic interior, and if I were specifically looking at one of these vehicles for its interior, I would honestly choose the BMW iX. I like the way the EQE looks inside, but it's kind of a blend of modern and classic Mercedes. The Audi Q8 looks like the rest of the Audi lineup, for better or for worse, but the BMW definitely looks like 21st century BMW. Some people really hate that. I actually think it's an advantage. Aside from these two options, the rest of the competitive set are more sideways competitors. The Rivian R1S obviously is a luxury contender, but it's much more off-road focused. We have way more ground clearance. We have the availability of a quad motor system. We have high towing capabilities, etc. It's really in a different league. It also is bigger and offers a third row, of course. We then have the Tesla Model Y with its absolutely itty-bitty little third row. That is obviously going to be the value option, and it's definitely going to be faster than the models we're talking about here if we're talking about the performance version. Then we have the absolutely bonkers Tesla Model X that has 3 rows or 2 rows, your choice. It actually has 2 different 3-row configurations, which is a little weird there, but it is definitely expensive unless you're talking about the top-end configurations of the BMW or the Mercedes, at which point Model X Plaid actually doesn't look like too bad of a deal. Also, you're going to get the very reliable Tesla charging network. One thing that some folks might be interested in waiting to at least sample is the Polestar 3. We don't know top-end pricing, but we know it's going to start at around $83,900, and Polestar has been very deliberately saying that they are targeting not necessarily the Audi or the Mercedes or even the BMW with the Polestar 3. They say they're actually going to be going after the Porsche Cayenne Electric, which we will see in about a year or so. That's really big talk from a relatively startup EV brand, but so far from what we've seen from Polestar, I sort of am inclined to believe it because their models have been very performance and handling focused, and it looks like they're really taking that to the next level with the Polestar 3. If you want something a little bit softer with a third row that is oddly related to the Polestar 3, that would be the Volvo EX90. That's going to be in this approximately $80,000 range. That's going to have all-wheel drive standard. It's going to have the third row standard. It's going to be more family focused and a bit boxier as well. But you definitely have a lot of solid options to choose from in this growing segment. If my money were on the line, I probably would lead towards the Audi Q8 e-tron if I needed the vehicle right now. I think my second pick would be the BMW, and my third pick would be the EQE. But that's primarily because of the styling. The EQE styling just doesn't speak to me right now, and I do prefer the boxier look of the Q8 and the BMW iX. You absolutely cannot go wrong with the Mercedes. It is definitely solidly efficient, but the BMW iX I think is an excellent buy, as is the Audi, and I really like the spare tire in the Audi. I'm really eager to see what the Polestar 3 is like, though, so be sure and stay tuned for that. And in the meantime, hit that subscribe button so you can be updated on all of our latest videos, including updated video content on the Audi Q8 e-tron, which is coming up soon because I've actually driven it already, and I'll talk about that more in a separate video. See all of you later.